At 50, Randolph Scott stunned Hollywood with a revelation no one expected. Decades of hidden love letters between him and Cary Grant suddenly came into question. The myth of two bachelors living as eternal playboys collapsed into whispers of something far more tender and forbidden. These letters, tucked away in drawers and vaults, spoke of nights spent together, of promises made when the cameras stopped rolling, of a love carefully erased by studio publicity machines. The exposure was not good at all. It threatened reputations built on cowboy grit and leading man charm. Behind the glamour, the letters revealed the price of keeping secrets in an unforgiving age. To understand how such a revelation could shake Hollywood, we must go back to the dusty roads of Randolph Scott's beginnings. Randolph Scott was born George Randolph Scott in 1898 in the quiet city of Orange County, Virginia. He was one of 7 children in a strict, church-going family that valued hard work and discipline above all else. His father, a textile worker who later found success in accounting, taught him the virtues of order and restraint. His mother gave him a love for literature and music, but never could have imagined her son would become a face of American masculinity. The Scotts moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, when Randolph was still young. There, he grew up amid red clay fields, horse-drawn wagons, and the lingering traditions of the Old South. It was a world of polished Sunday shoes, gospel hymns, and a culture that frowned on anything outside of convention. To be different in that time was dangerous, and boys were expected to follow a path of obedience, honor, and silent endurance. Randolph carried himself with a natural elegance even as a child. Tall and lean, he gravitated toward sports, excelling in football and track. Yet he was also drawn to the quiet escape of libraries, reading stories of knights and adventurers who lived outside the rules. His classmates saw him as polite but distant, a young man who kept secrets close to his chest. The world outside North Carolina was changing quickly. The roaring 20s were approaching. Jazz spilled out of speakeasies. Women cut their hair short and claimed freedoms never before granted. But in the conservative South, change moved slower. The idea of same-sex desire was never spoken aloud, only hinted at with cruel jokes and stern warnings. Scott attended Georgia Tech briefly, studying engineering, before the First World War disrupted everything. He enlisted, serving in France as an artillery observer. The war exposed him to new cultures, new ways of thinking, and new freedoms. He returned home carrying both discipline from the battlefield and a quiet longing for something beyond the rigid walls of Southern tradition. After the war, he completed his education at the University of North Carolina, again dabbling in engineering, though his heart was restless. The silver screen was capturing America's imagination. Stars like Rudolph Valentino and Douglas Fairbanks lit up theaters with tales of daring and romance. In that glow, Scott began to dream of something larger than the life his family had planned. It was a time when Hollywood was still wild, still forming its legends. And for a tall, handsome Southern gentleman, the lure of cinema and reinvention was impossible to resist. Randolph Scott arrived in Hollywood during the late 1920s, a city exploding with opportunity and uncertainty. Silent films still dominated, but sound was on the horizon. He came with little more than striking good looks, an athletic build, and a determination to make something of himself. His first break came through connections. A family friend introduced him to the legendary producer Cecil B. DeMille. Scott, tall and polite, made an impression. Though his early roles were small and often uncredited, he stood out on screen. He moved like a man who belonged in front of a camera. By 1928, he was training his voice and posture, preparing for the talkies that would soon reshape Hollywood forever. The transition to sound brought disaster for many silent stars, but Scott thrived. His Southern drawl, softened by careful coaching, gave him a unique presence. His first credited roles came in westerns and war pictures, two genres that suited his upright stance and quiet strength. By the early 1930s, audiences recognized his face, even if they did not yet know his name. Hollywood in those years was controlled by the studio system. Contracts bound actors to grueling schedules and strict morality clauses. Public images were carefully crafted. A man like Scott was cast as the ideal American gentleman, loyal, dependable, and masculine. He lacked the flamboyance of Errol Flynn, or the smoldering intensity of Clark Gable, but he carried an authenticity that audiences trusted. The turning point came with The Last of the Mohicans in 1936, where Scott's performance caught critics' attention. Soon after, he became a staple in westerns, embodying the rugged cowboy who defended justice on the frontier. His partnership with director Henry Hathaway cemented his reputation. Films like The Texans and Jesse James showcased his stoic bravery. By the 1,940 Randolph Scott was not just an actor. He was a symbol of American ideals. Yet fame came with a cost. The studio dictated not only his roles but also his personal life. Publicists placed him on magazine covers, often photographed with glamorous actresses, implying romances that rarely existed. Fans believed in the image of a dashing bachelor who simply had not yet settled down. Behind closed doors, the pressure to maintain that image grew heavier. Scott purchased a home in Santa Monica, where he would eventually share space with another rising star, Cary Grant. The move would change both of their lives. As Scott's stardom rose, so did the stakes of the secret he was beginning to carry. It was in the early 1930s that Randolph Scott crossed paths with Cary Grant. Grant, still finding his footing after arriving from England, was charming, witty, and ambitious. Scott was steady, reserved, and grounded. They seemed like opposites, but that contrast drew them together. Soon, they were not only friends but roommates, sharing a beach house in Santa Monica that overlooked the Pacific. The house became famous in Hollywood gossip columns. Reporters called it bachelor heaven. Photographers captured the two men sunbathing, cooking meals together, or lounging by the pool. Studios encouraged the narrative, seeing it as wholesome publicity. Two eligible bachelors living the California dream. What the public did not know was that their connection ran deeper than casual friendship. Biographers later pointed to coded language in their correspondence, letters filled with affection and longing. They spent over a decade together, moving through various homes, often inseparable. When Cary filmed on location, Randolph visited. When Randolph worked long hours, Cary waited at home. They built a private domestic life in plain sight, hidden only by the cultural blindness of the time. But secrecy was always necessary. The Hays Code, introduced in 1934, imposed strict moral rules on Hollywood. Anything hinting at homosexuality was forbidden on screen, and off-screen behavior could end contracts. Studios arranged public appearances with women, pairing stars with actresses at premieres and parties. Randolph was photographed with Marion DuPont, the wealthy horsewoman he briefly married. Cary was linked to women like Virginia, Cheryl, and Phyllis Brooks. These relationships served as shields, deflecting suspicion. Their home, however, told another story. Friends recalled evenings filled with laughter, shared meals, and a sense of comfort that neither man found elsewhere. Their bond weathered career ups and downs, gossip columns, and the pressures of fame. It was an intimacy rare in Hollywood, where most friendships dissolved under competition. Rumors did circulate. Some whispered about the nature of their closeness. Confidential magazine hinted at improprieties, though never directly. Studios threatened to separate them if speculation grew too loud. Yet Randolph and Cary held on, finding ways to protect what they had. Still, living under constant watch took its toll. Love letters were hidden away, coded phrases replacing direct declarations. Travel was discreet, often under the guise of work. Every gesture carried risk. In an era when exposure could destroy careers, their greatest challenge was not the lack of love, but the necessity of silence. The longer the secrecy lasted, the more dangerous it became. Whispers were growing louder, and both men faced choices that would define their futures. By the mid-1940s, whispers about Randolph Scott and Cary Grant had begun to unsettle the studios. Hollywood was entering a more conservative moment. America had just come out of war, and public appetite leaned toward stability and family values. Two bachelors living together for years no longer looked innocent. It looked suspicious. Confidential magazine, notorious for its sensational stories, kept a file on them. Photographs of Scott and Grant in swim trunks, cooking together, or simply walking the beach, became evidence for innuendo. The studios panicked. Both men were valuable investments, with box office power to protect. Pressure mounted. Separate homes were suggested. More staged romances were demanded. Cary Grant reluctantly entered marriages that seemed more convenient than affectionate. Randolph Scott pulled further into the world of westerns, choosing a path of stoic solitude. Their once open domestic partnership dissolved under the weight of scrutiny. Letters between them, once frequent, became more guarded. The emotional cost was heavy. For Scott, the studio's demands cut into his identity. He had built a career as a cowboy hero, yet the real battles he faced were off-screen. Friends noted that he became more withdrawn, focused on work, less willing to trust outsiders. Hollywood, which had given him stardom, now forced him into a double life. Professional setbacks followed. Roles were lost to younger actors. A new generation of stars, like Gregory Peck and Alan Ladd, began to dominate the genre Scott had once ruled. While he continued working steadily, the sparkle of leading man fame began to dim. Cary Grant, meanwhile, reinvented himself as a romantic comedy icon, but his public life grew ever more complicated. The bond between the two men endured, though altered. They still saw each other, still cared deeply, but the easy joy of their shared homes was gone. Instead, there was distance, caution, and the awareness that discovery could ruin them both. For Scott, the crisis was not just about career or reputation. It was about loneliness. The life he had shared with Cary represented a rare moment of truth in a world built on performance. Without it, the years felt colder. The price of silence had become unbearable. And yet, he carried on. Like the cowboys he played, Randolph Scott pushed forward through hardship. But the cracks in his heart, once hidden, were beginning to show. By the 1,950 seconds, Randolph Scott had become one of Hollywood's most reliable stars. He transitioned fully into westerns, working with directors like Bud Boeticher to create a series of films that critics later called masterpieces of the genre. His characters were older, wiser, often scarred by unseen battles. Audiences admired his steady presence, though the bright glow of stardom had shifted toward younger faces. Off-screen, Scott married Patricia Stillman in 1944, a union that endured until his death. They raised 2 children and presented a picture of stability that the public accepted. Yet biographers suggest that his deepest emotional ties remained with Cary Grant. The friendship between the two men never fully vanished. They vacationed together at times, dined in Beverly Hills, and quietly supported each other through marriages, divorces, and personal struggles. Hollywood itself was changing. The studio system weakened. Television rose. Social norms shifted slowly. But the topic of sexuality remained dangerous. For Scott, the hidden letters and memories of shared years carried both comfort and sadness. They were proof of love, but also a reminder of what had been sacrificed. In retirement, he lived comfortably, investing wisely, and enjoying a quieter life in Los Angeles and Palm Springs. Friends recalled his dignity, his reserve, and his charm. He played golf, hosted dinners, and appeared content. But those who knew him well saw moments of reflection, times when his eyes seemed far away, as if revisiting another life he could never fully claim. By the 1,960 seconds and 1,970 seconds, younger generations began questioning the rigid morality that had shaped Scott's youth. The world was slowly learning to speak openly about what had once been silenced. Yet for Randolph Scott, the opportunity to live openly never came. He remained a man shaped by an era of secrets, carrying his truth quietly to the end. He passed away in 1987 at the age of 89, remembered as one of the screen's great cowboys. His legacy was one of professionalism, strength, and dignity. But behind the legend lay a human story of love denied, of companionship cherished, and of letters that told the tale the cameras never could. Randolph Scott's story is not just about an actor who rode across silver screen prairies. It is about a man who lived in 2 worlds, one public and one private. At 50, When decades of hidden love letters with Cary Grant came to light, the illusion of the eternal bachelor shattered. What remained was something far more human. A portrait of two men, bound by affection in a time when such bonds could not be named. The cost of silence was steep. Careers were protected, but hearts were left scarred. Their lives remind us that fame often demanded masks, and those masks came at the price of truth. Yet within those private letters was proof that love existed, even when society forbade it. Today, as we look back, we see more than cowboy grit or Hollywood glamour. We see two men who found comfort in each other, even under impossible conditions. Their story is a reminder that history is not just made of films and awards, but of hidden lives, whispered promises, and the resilience of the human spirit. If you found yourself moved by Randolph Scott's journey, share your thoughts in the comments. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe for more hidden stories of old Hollywood.